Most people never stop here. They cross the St. Johns River, glance at the water, and keep driving. I almost did the same thing. In fact, I passed this sign completely. But if you've watched Travel Made Personal for any length of time, you already know we break for signs. So I turned around. And that's how I accidentally found the birthplace of an entire Florida county. Standing beside the historical marker was an enormous oak tree. Its bark looked like the wrinkled skin of someone who had lived 100 years or more. As I stood beneath its branches, I couldn't help but wonder what it had seen. Steamboats, soldiers, settlers, native peoples traveling the river, entire generations coming and going. Because this quiet roadside marker doesn't just tell the story of Volusia County. It tells the story of thousands of years of human history hidden beside one of Florida's oldest highways. And like so many Forgotten Friday stories, it begins with a place that almost nobody notices anymore. The marker is called the Birthplace of Volusia County. It sits in the tiny community of Volusia, tucked along the eastern bank of the St. Johns River. Today it's little more than a quiet riverside settlement. But long before highways and county lines existed, this place mattered. The St. Johns River was the reason. Flowing north through the heart of Florida, it served as a highway long before roads were ever imagined. For thousands of years, indigenous peoples lived along these waters. The river provided food, transportation, trade routes, and life itself. Archaeologists refer to many of these early inhabitants as part of the St. John's culture, a civilization that left behind enormous shell middens along the riverbanks. The Mayaca people lived in this region when Spanish explorers first arrived. Imagine standing where the marker sits today and seeing dugout canoes instead of pickup trucks. The river would have been alive with movement. The landscape would have felt completely different, and yet the river itself remains. Slow, patient, watching history drift past. As centuries passed, the St. Johns became one of the most important transportation corridors in Florida. Spanish explorers traveled it. Missionaries established religious outposts nearby. Traders followed. Empires competed for control. This bend in the river became a crossroads. Trading posts appeared. Military forts arose during the Seminole Wars. Merchants exchanged goods with native tribes. Settlers established communities. Then came the age of steam. Steamboats transformed the St. Johns River into one of Florida's busiest transportation routes. Volusia became a thriving landing. Passengers arrived, mail moved through town, goods flowed in and out. For a time, this little settlement was one of the most important places in the region. Important enough that when Florida created a new county in 1854, they named it after this community, Volusia County, a county that now contains hundreds of thousands of residents, all because of this tiny river settlement. But even during its prosperity, there was a mystery. Nobody knows exactly where the name Volusia came from. Historians have searched for decades. The answer remains elusive. Some believe it came from a Native American phrase. Others point to a trader named Voluche. Still, others suggest a British landowner named Valois. One theory even traces the name to an ancient Roman jurist. Imagine that. A place important enough to name an entire county after. Yet nobody can agree on how it got its name. It's one of those historical riddles that makes places like this fascinating to me. The deeper you dig, the more questions you uncover. And perhaps that's fitting, because mysteries have a way of lingering long after facts disappear. For decades, the river was king. Then the railroad arrived. Tracks stretched across Florida. Transportation changed almost overnight. Goods moved faster by rail. Passengers preferred trains. Businesses followed the new routes, and Volusia was left behind. The railroad bypassed the town. Steamboats became less frequent. Trade declined. The warehouses grew quieter. The population slowly shrank. What had once been a thriving transportation hub became a place people simply passed through. The same river that had created its prosperity could no longer save it. Technology had changed. The world had moved on, and Volusia faded into the background. Not completely abandoned, not entirely forgotten, just quieter than before. Standing here today, it's easy to miss all of that. Cars rush by, the river moves quietly nearby. The historical marker tells only a fraction of the story. But the oak tree caught my attention. Its bark was deeply furrowed and weathered, ancient looking. The kind of tree that makes you stop talking for a minute. I found myself looking past the sign and imagining everything that once happened here. Steamboat whistles echoing across the river, merchants unloading cargo, soldiers crossing the frontier, native families navigating the water long before any county existed. The strange thing about places like this is that nothing dramatic remains. No ruins, no crumbling buildings, no abandoned streets. Just a sign, a river, and an old tree. Yet somehow those simple things tell a bigger story than many preserved landmarks ever could, because they force you to imagine what has been lost. And imagination has a way of bringing history back to life. Forgotten places aren't always ghost towns. Sometimes they're places that survived, places that remain quietly present while the world changes around them. Volusia never completely disappeared. It simply became a footnote to its own legacy. Millions of people know the county. Very few know the place that gave it its name. Standing beneath the oak tree, I kept thinking about time, about how entire generations can rise and fall while a river keeps flowing and a tree keeps growing. The marker tells us when the county was born. The landscape tells us something much bigger. It tells us how many stories came before and how many have already been forgotten. If you enjoy uncovering forgotten places, hidden history, and the stories waiting beside the backroads and riverbanks, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments, what's the most interesting historical marker you've ever stopped to read? I almost drove past this place, and honestly, that's what makes the story perfect. Because the birthplace of Volusia County isn't hidden deep in the wilderness. It isn't protected behind museum walls. It's sitting quietly beside a road, waiting for someone curious enough to stop. A marker, a river, an ancient oak, and thousands of years of history hiding in plain sight. Sometimes the most remarkable stories aren't found at the end of the road. Sometimes they're the ones we almost miss.